Bruins Beat, brought to you by Ice Picks and the Game Time app.
And welcome into the Bruins Beat on CLNS Media, presented by Prize Picks. Go use that promo code CLNS to get $50 back if you play just $5. And we're presented by Game Time. Go use that promo code CLNS to get $20 off that first purchase. Terms apply. We are re-recording the beginning of the episode. So I'm Evan Marinofsky. That's Conor Ryan. For the second time on Monday, Conor, what is up?
Evan, I feel like I'm in like a Quentin Tarantino script. I feel like we're all over the place. We're recording new intros where it's all messed up. My voice is cracking. My third Duncan of the day. Everything has gone to hell. How are you doing?
I'm doing great. I am laughing my ass off because I have done the best thing professionally I have ever done. Hawk Tua has weighed in on the Jeremy Swayman saga. Says he will not be joining the show after she believes he rejected an 8-year $8 million offer, which again is just, I think that's my professional peak, is getting her to weigh in on this. But we are not re-recording the beginning of this episode for that. That's a whole nother episode. You'll have multiple articles about that. So you'll be covered with that. But the reason we are recording a new intro is because Louis Gross, who obviously is Jeremy Swayman's agent, put out a statement. So how this episode is going to be formatted is we're going to talk about this statement for the first 10 minutes, maybe longer, of the episode, and then it'll segue into the episode we recorded about 3 hours ago, which was reacting to the Bruins press conference. And that's all still very relevant because, again, at this hour, still, that was what they said their offer was. So there will still be that episode.
I mean, I think the prevailing sentiment, regardless of what we say right now and what we said earlier, is that no one comes out good in all this.
No.
The optics, the vibes, pretty rough right now, Evan.
Pretty rough. And I'll read the statement. Quote, "Normally, I do not release statements or discuss negotiations to the media. However, in this case, I feel I need to defend my client. At today's press conference, $64 million was referenced. This was the first time that number was discussed in our negotiations. Prior to the press conference, no offer was made reaching that level. We are extremely disappointed. This was not fair to Jeremy. We will take a few days to discuss where we go from here." Again, you've got them claiming that this was the first time that number was discussed in our negotiations. Prior to the press conference, no offer was made reaching that level, which makes me wonder, either A, someone is lying. Someone is outright lying. They are lying, saying that they didn't get that when they did, or Neely is lying and they never offered that. Or B, which is also not great business, the Bruins offered him that contract when the press conference was over, which would be bananas. If that's the case, that is freaking crazy. What do you make of all of this?
What I make of it is exactly what I said in the intro, right? Where no one wins out of this. And now when you hit the point where it's he said going through the media, it just, the optics look terrible, right? Now you're ping-ponging back and forth between which side looks worse. For most of today, it was Swayman and his camp looked terrible. He's selfish. He's not, he's turned down $8 million a year, what have you. And now it's flipped to the Bruins. Again, as you said, either someone's lying, the Bruins didn't offer that, or as you said, they offered it after the press conference, which you can't open up that can of worms. You can't say that and have it immediately be the case, which we all saw on Twitter, on every single digestible media channel of Swayman getting roasted today. You can't open up that can of worms, have him catch that flack, and then offer the contract just because you're mad of how the contract negotiations have stalled out so far. So even if that's the case and $8 million is still on the table now, one, I don't think Swayman and his camp are taking that now if they're pissed off.
Yeah.
And if they weren't offered at all, that's even worse. If that is the case of what the Bruins did in this regard, again, it is either someone is lying or the Bruins look really bad. That's the two options, right? And if someone's lying, which again, it is a negotiation, people say stuff, leak stuff through the media to get people talking and get the optics shifted one way or the other. That's what it is, not just for this negotiation, but for any negotiation in free agency, all that stuff, like leaking stuff and getting stuff out through the media and having people talk about it, is a ploy used year after year, right? And it's something that it's not within the realm of possibility that someone is fibbing in this regard, right? In terms of what was offered, what wasn't. But whoever's on the right side of things, to have it hit this point now where both sides are throwing rocks at each other, both sides are now getting bloodied as a result of it. Like, it's, again, probably people who are pissed at the Bruins right now, maybe 3 hours earlier, were saying that Swayman and his camp were being unreasonable and selfish. Whoever you map it out, and this again goes to what we mentioned on our podcast earlier today, and I think a lot of it is still relevant.
Regardless of how minutes,
yeah, regardless of how this plays out, it just sucks for everyone involved, because whether it's the Bruins are getting called out if they really didn't have this offer in place or did it, they look like a clown car operation. And if Jeremy Swayman and his agents are lying and they really had $8 million and they haven't taken that, then they look bad when you look at the fact that the season's starting in 8 days and you're an incomplete roster about to go into the grind of an 82-game season. And right now, like, you could, depending on how this contract plays out, what happens if they sign it, whenever it gets signed, if that's the case, maybe we'll talk about that. Both sides now just look bad. Like, even if you know, an 8-year deal is finally signed in a couple of days, which we'll see if that happens. Both, you know, the Bruins and Swayman both took some pretty bad hits in this, and it's a reason why these prolonged negotiations, and it's why Sweeney does not like talking through the media when it comes to these things. You have these situations where no one kind of benefits from it. Both sides look pretty ugly, and both sides spend the whole day getting ripped from just pretty much every angle, right?
I don't know. Again, and it's hard. And you have people on Twitter saying this one's lying, that one's lying. We don't know who's lying at this moment. We do not. You can have your guesses. You can make your inferences. Maybe the truth is somewhere in the middle. Maybe it wasn't 64 million. Maybe the contract was like 62.5 and Neely rounded up. I don't know. But again, if the Bruins lied, if if Neely comes out and says, "Well, that 64 million was just that was just random. That was off the top of my head." Well, then that is a horrendous slip up.
Yeah,
that you should have immediately. Yeah, you can't do that. And I mean, I see people being like, "No, Sweeney and Neely need to be fired." If I don't know about that, but if they did lie, that is a horrific thing to do in a negotiation, right. And that's awful. If you lied, right? Like, if that never happened, if what Louis Gross and Swayman's camp are saying is true, that is abhorrent. You should not do that.
Right. Well, and also, I mean, it's very puzzling. If that is the case and the Bruins are straight up lying about that, or again, it doesn't even absolve them if it's on the table now, but it was after Swayman gets roasted for 5 hours straight.
I was going to say, like,
it doesn't help.
You get this 8 times $8 million deal you want, but we're going to roast you in the press conference.
Yeah, like, that's not doing good. But that's also an embarrassing look if that is the case. But you just look at where these negotiations are. It's not like Neely let that slip out. Neely was not even asked a question about Swayman. It was a question to Don Sweeney about, are they surprised with the initial offer? And Neely literally jumped in to be like, "Oh, yeah, I was surprised," which then opens up the avenue as to, like, why were you surprised? So, like, if you're going to go out there and mention 64 million, you have to imagine that wasn't like an off. I mean, again, you have to imagine that wasn't like an off the cuff, annoyed, reaction. If you're putting it out there that you're not happy with how these things have gone, and you mentioned that exact number, and you didn't have the offer in place, yikes! It's not good. So again, like, either
you have to be buttoned up going up there is the biggest thing. You have that planned. That doesn't just come out.
Exactly. So if that's the case, and that offer wasn't on the table, what are we doing here? And if that's the case, then these negotiations are going to go ass backwards, if not completely unravel, if that's where this is right now. Because, Neely mentioned earlier today that he had conversation with Swayman. He wants to be here. Is that going to be the case if that is true and the Bruins lied and put him through that? And again, maybe it's the other way around. Maybe it's His agents are doing an expected thing of every posturing, when it comes to contract negotiations. I didn't follow the day-to-day of William Nylander's contract. I have to imagine there was a lot of ebbs and flows as well. I don't think it got to the point where
I don't remember
Toronto's management was saying something wasn't true or what have you, but it's rough right now in terms of if the Bruins weren't upfront about what was on the table, and they put Swayman in a bad light when you hope that at this point you're trying to get more progress done and get to the finish line. Like how do you move on from that if that is what the case is, right? That's the legitimate issue right now, beyond the fact of, like, again, people embellish, people say things to the media to get things going. It's all about optics. And again, the optics have shifted right now, but when all is said and done and these two sides you expect sign a contract, what's that relationship like right now? Because everyone said it's all business. It's not. It's not all.
It isn't. It is not. And here's the thing. I mean, could Swayman's side be lying? Of course, they could absolutely be lying. Yeah. And, I think that's a completely reasonable possibility. I think it is a possibility that, they kind of made that statement that they aren't lying, but maybe they are. We spent a lot of the episode we recorded earlier ripping on Swayman. So I'm not going to spend a lot of time in here repeating myself, which you're going to hear in about 5-10 minutes. But again, if the Bruins lied, if what Louis Gross said is correct, right? If what he said is correct, I think this hurts the Bruins in many ways when it comes to signing their own players down the road, when it comes to signing free agents. And by the way, I'm not saying it's not official. It's not official that they lied, and we don't know which side lied or where the truth is in all of this. But if it comes out that the Bruins did lie, I mean, if you're a free agent, if you're a UFA somewhere, why would you pick here? Or if you're a guy who is in this system and you have to try to re-sign here, why would you try? Like, yeah. And again, like, it puts a damper in things where it's like, oh, well, look what we did to Jeremy Swayman, your franchise goalie. What are you going to do to me? So that is all on the table now. That's the thing, is this is a true roller coaster. And I think the tough part is right now, like, it's a lot of just finger pointing. It's a lot of just saying stuff.
Not productive.
No. And that's the thing. And Ty Anderson tweeted out, they need to get in a room. They need to be in a room like Tuesday.
With a couple of Hulk hands.
Yep. Get the Hulk hands. Get the
couple of Capri
replenish
Suns.
the room with snacks. Yes. Orange slices. The Hawk Tua podcast playing in the background.
No.
No, because that'll make them get out as fast as possible.
It's
you
true.
know? Like, so that'll work. Or put on this podcast. It'll also make you run out the room as fast as you possibly can. But they got to be in the negotiating room tomorrow. Like, I don't know where Louis Gross is located, but that dude should be on a plane to Boston like tonight to try to fix this. But again, I wonder what the damage is. Like, that's the other end of it. Like, do they even want to at this point?
That's why it's so puzzling, Evan, right? Because one thing that we mentioned during our earlier podcast, which you're about to hear, is from pointing the criticism at Swayman and his camp is like, what did you stand to benefit from dragging this out if you didn't take an $8 million payout, right? Like, you're now like, the optics are rough. You got Bruins fans who were praising you a few months ago are now going to be hypercritical of you. By that same token, what did Cam Neely and the Bruins stand to benefit from embellishing that they had a $64 million offer on the table when it hurts your credibility? It hurts kind of the reputation you've cultivated over the years of being a first-rate organization. Like, it didn't stand to benefit anyone at all, especially the Bruins. And if that is true and Swayman and his camp are pissed right now, like, what is next? Are we looking at? We joked, Evan. We joked earlier about Jeremy.
And you'll hear it. You'll hear it in like 30 minutes.
And you'll hear it about some potential trades that we tossed out as more of a joke than anything. But, like, what's next? Like, what do you think is next right now? Because I'll be honest, I did not expect to be on this roller coaster on Monday, and I went off. I'm crying. I'm already on, like, I got off the ride, but I'm still stuck in the harness, so they're sending me again. That's how I feel right now.
Oh, someone's on. Oh, James Hagens. Yes, you're a Boston Bruin.
Yeah.
You guys will get that reference later on. I will say, though, in all seriousness, I just, like I mentioned, they need to get to the negotiating table now. If the Bruins are lying, and Neely reiterated it on Monday of, Swayman wants to be here long term. He's mentioned that. Big insiders have reported that they want to come to a long term agreement. Do you still want to be here? Like, do you still want to be here through all of this? I don't know. And does this move the negotiation forward? Do both sides say, look, this is a low. This is a low. We cannot go lower. The only way is up. We've got to negotiate this now. Or do both sides basically say, F you, we're set. We'll talk to you in a couple months, trade him, but he doesn't want to play here. Like, I don't know. I honestly don't know. And I think that's the other part of this is there a next shoe to drop? Do the Bruins respond? Does Sweeney now have another press conference? That's the other thing.
Right.
Like, do they stay silent on this?
Do they show us like a piece of paper that just says like 8 by 64? It's like we faxed this. We faxed this email. We faxed this on September 21st.
Is this going to be like, are we going to be like Woodward and Bernstein and we're going to be like,
Yes.
like finding the proof that like one of the sides lied? Like, is that what we're going to have to do here? I had a tweet cooking in the drafts. I don't know if people get it. I was going to say, Hawk Tua turning on Jeremy Swayman is like when Walter Cronkite turned on the Vietnam War, where it's just like, if you've lost Cronkite, you've lost Middle America. If you've lost Hawk Tua, you have lost the hockey world.
Evan, I can comfortably say I can't believe we're in this spot now talking about this on September 30th. I cannot believe we are in this spot right now.
It's wild to me because, like, this is something we would expect to be doing like a second podcast today. Trade deadline, free agency day, maybe the draft, or like a firing. A firing, like someone leaves. This crazy. So that's the Louis Gross statement. We cannot put out a podcast that does not include that in it. I feel that's irresponsible of us to just show one side. So that's that. So no outro for this because you will hear our regular podcast as scheduled right now. And welcome into the Bruins Beat, presented by Prize Picks. Go use that promo code CLNS to get $50 back when you play just $5. And we're presented by Game Time. Go use that promo code CLNS to get $20 off that first purchase. Terms apply. I'm Evan Marinofsky. That is Conor Ryan. Connor, what is up?
Evan, I'm doing well. How you doing?
Doing great. We've got quite a lot to talk about today on one subject, on everyone's favorite subject. As you can tell by what I imagine the headline will be, I think you amazing Bruins Beat listeners know what we'll be talking about today, and that is Jeremy Swayman. More Jeremy Swayman stuff. On Monday, the Bruins had basically their media day. They had Don Sweeney speak to the media, Jim Montgomery, Cam Neely, Charlie Jacobs. And as you guys can imagine, most of the questioning was regarding Jeremy Swayman. And there was a lot to take from it. I think the quote that we will start with, because we're going to go by quotes, was regarding what Swayman's camp initially asked for. So Don Sweeney, by the way, has held a firm line in that he will not discuss figures. He won't discuss years, term, anything like that. Years and term are the same thing. So years, money, all that stuff. And Neely said, well, I don't want to get into the weeds with what his ask is, but I know that I have 64 million reasons why I'd be playing right now. It's been hard. I've been trying to figure out the 64 million reasons. I'm on like reason number 75. We have a long way to go until 64. 64 million in that they offered him $64 million. And again, inferring what that means is that he turned it down, because if he accepted it, this would not be a thing right now. So let's go off of those comments. 64 million. We'll again assume that that's $64 million. Just Neely didn't just randomly choose 64 million.
I think we're going to operate with that. Yeah, we're going to operate the assumption that it's 64 million. I assume 8 years, 64 million, 8 by 8.
I would assume, which is exactly what you and I said all summer. Of hey, that makes sense for both parties. It's a little more than he's worth. They are sticking their neck out, but hopefully worth it in the long run. I am stunned. If he turned that down, which he clearly did, that is incredible. Incredible. And Connor, you and I are pro getting the bag. We said this actually, we had lunch after the Bruins thing, and we said, man, we're going to look terrible coming out, on the side of management when we're pro players getting the bag. And we are, but within reason. We've said 8 million is more than what he's currently worth. What he's currently worth is like around 6, like over 6, but around that 6.5 range. If you had to, say, oh, this is what he's worth today, that's what he is worth. 8 is what you hope he's worth halfway through that 8-year deal. And then you hope that by year 7 or 8, it's like, oh, 8 million. Wow, it's a bargain for Jeremy Swayman. But it balances out with those first 2 or 3 years where it's like, oh, 8's not quite there. I can't believe he would say no to that. I can't.
Yeah. I mean, I think at this point, right, all parties have to be on the same page in terms of like an 8-year deal. Because I think last week, Elliot Friedman mentioned that the Bruins are looking at an 8-year deal. I believe Pierre LeBrun mentioned just a few days ago that Swayman's priority is an 8-year deal. So term doesn't seem to be the option, right? I think everyone wants him here for 8 years. Swayman wants the security. The Bruins want what they expect is their number one goalie here for the long haul. It seems right now it comes down to what the payout is. And as you said, we are pro getting the bag, which is why 8 years and 8 million, 64 million is pretty good for a guy that, listen, like, I think it's well established. I don't think you'd hear anyone like between us, more experienced hockey minds, like people who are in the Bruins, anyone like that. No one's operating with the assumption that this is like a complete gamble or like that Swayman hasn't shown to this point that he has all the makings of a future, number one goalie, a guy that can contend for a Vezina, a guy that could lead you to a cup, right? Like, look at just how dynamic he was in the playoffs last year. Like, there's a lot to like about why the Bruins are probably willing to overpay a little bit in terms of what he's shown so far with what $8 million is. Like, would be the 5th highest paid goalie in the league right now. A guy that has not been the number one goalie before, had a great playoff run, but a lot of that 8 million is banking off future production and belief in a guy that, listen, I think there's one thing we've kind of known or noticed maybe from this contract negotiation. Jeremy Swayman is very confident in himself. He always is. And I'm not saying that in a bad way. Like, that is what you want out of a goalie. This is a guy that doesn't waver in his confidence, is set, believes he's on the right path, feels like he gives his team the chance to win every single night. And when he doesn't, he takes himself to task. And, he's been here the entire offseason working on his game. There's a lot to like about why the Bruins want to invest in this guy, which is why 8x8 seems pretty fair for what this is. And if Swayman and his representatives aren't buying that, or they think he's worth more, and what was talked about before was like the Charlie McAvoy contract, right? And I feel like when that came out, we're like, I don't know about that. That seems pretty wild. Like, 8x8 seems like a good compromise if that's really what he's looking for. If he and his agents are set in their ways of that they think he's worth $9.5 million, which would put him on the tier with Sergei Bobrovsky, who has 2 Vezinas and just won a cup, and Andrei Vasilevsky, who's won 2 cups and at least 1 Vezina and has long held probably the title of probably the best goalie in the league right now for the last 5 odd years. You want to put yourself on that tier when, again, you have all the potential in the world. Jeremy Swayman is a great goalie who ideally is worth an 8x8 year deal in short order. But to want that, to be on that tier, and to not budge, at least for right now, to get to the point where, I'm sure we're going to talk about this later, but Korpisalo is going to be probably your season opening starter, regardless of what happens the next couple of days. It's wild that we've gotten to this point. And at this point, like, again, we are pro getting the bag, but something's got to give. Because if 8x8, if you're not willing to, get to the negotiating table and try to find the middle ground even there, that's very concerning. And it's a kind of a bad sign of where these things could go. Because right now it does feel like it's like Neely hit the nuclear button. Like, how do you kind of move on from this? If that is what it's offering and they're still holding out here, the optics kind of shift a little bit. And maybe that's why Neely more or less called it out here. But things could get pretty ugly. And you don't want that to happen in any contract negotiation, especially for a guy that you still want to sign to an 8-year contract to be your number one goalie. Like, things could kind of go sideways pretty quickly if this doesn't get resolved.
I do wonder if they do want an 8-year deal because, again, like guys like Pasternak and McAvoy have taken bridge deals prior to those big contracts and getting paid top 5 money in their position. And I do wonder if the Bruins, Whitney obviously had reported that 4-year deal. We don't know if that's true or not, but I do wonder if they did come forward with a 4-year deal initially or something of the sort. In terms of, like you mentioned, Korpisalo, to me, like I left Monday and that press conference firmly believing it was almost like a coordinated attack by the Bruins on Swayman of like, we're going to do this, we're going to do this. And maybe it was, maybe it wasn't. But you know how I know they are pissed? Pissed. And we knew Sweeney was pissed because he was pissed at his preseason press conference. Neely certainly, said he was surprised. He hit the nuclear button. I didn't expect to see Jim Montgomery as agitated as he was. And you know how I know he's agitated? Because he announced the game 1 starter over a week before the game. Like, he didn't announce starters in the playoffs. And again, there's advantages and to that and different stuff. But to me, like, to come out when I don't think anyone was expecting him to say that, like right off the top and go, yeah, Joonas Korpisalo is our game 1 starter right now. Like, again, I just go back to they put the ball in his court. Montgomery even saying, he was asked about, how long would it take practice time wise for Swayman to get back up and running. And he was very open with like, he's not going to be ready for the start of the season. We have 2 practices until the first game of the year. Everything else is just preseason games and pregame skates. So to me, that's another reason why, I just look at, you look at what Neely's comment was. You look at what, Sweeney has said in the past. Sweeney didn't have to do a lot today. And then Montgomery with the Korpisalo thing to me. And you also have Charlie Jacobs saying, we spend to the cap. We plan on spending to the cap. We want players to feel empowered and this and that to ask for what they want. They're pissed. They are pissed. There's no other way around that. And like you and I are pretty, I think, realistic. Like we're not like, oh my God, there's bedlam, it's a war going on in the Bruins, it's a war going on in that world. But this to me, like to have your head coach come out and go, yeah, like Joonas Korpisalo's starting. We like Joonas. We're going with Joonas. Like, I don't know, man. To me, like that's telling. That is real telling for the head coach to do that as well.
Yeah. I mean, from the perspective of the team, which again, as you said before, Evan, we tried to lean on being more pro player and taking the player's side because it more often than not is the player that misses out on a lot of these things. But just viewing these things from the Bruins perspective and from what I assume Neely's perspective, right? So you had, I think, negative $1 million going into last offseason. You had no money at all.
Yeah. No money at all. Moneyball Bruins.
Yeah, you had nothing to work with. And Swayman and his camp takes you to arbitration, which also we need to reiterate. They brought the Bruins to arbitration. Again, go through the arbitration process, which sucks. You have your team pretty much telling you why you're not worth this amount of money. Sucks, but you also opted for it. So you deal with that. The Bruins, they settle. An independent arbitrator gives them, $3.475 million. The Bruins could have, put him on a 2-year deal with that. They had the option to. Had to be a 1-year deal. So he has 1 year on this arbitration rate and essentially like, hey, we got money next year. We'll kick this can down the road. We'll do right by you next year. And now they're in this spot where you have no traction done on a contract. You're missing your number 1 goalie. You've had, these comments from the Spit and Chicklets crew, from these other podcasts where Swayman has been very candid of, resetting the goalie market, the state of the cap, all these things. And again, good on the player for doing that. But if you're the Bruins camp, where now you're at this point where if you have an $8 million contract on the table after freeing up, a year of arbitration, not going to arbitration this year, again, just from the lens of Neely and the Bruins, yeah, that's probably a pretty valid reason why they're pretty pissed right now. There's as is the case with every contract negotiation, there's a lot more that I'm sure goes into it. But from their perspective right now, when you are, what are we recording? 8 days before the start of the year. And it's at this point when, again, every contract is its own battle. But when you look at how much money they had left over, there should have been a pretty clear runway in terms of even the high end of what they assumed the Swayman contract was going to be. To be at this point now where you're answering these questions during your season opening press conference and there's no traction, I could see why at that point Neely's fed up and puts that number out there, because now all the pressure and the onus you would think falls on Swayman and his camp, because if they're not settling for that, what are they going for right now? Because also, like, you look at it, whether the Bruins have the means to sign him to that deal or what, it does feel like more of the pressure is now on Swayman and his camp to either counter that or get back to the bargaining table. Because right now, like, the optics don't look great, and it's not great. The Bruins have to drop those, potential contract terms of what, Neely mentioned, but it's kind of where they are right now. Again, a little over a week from the start of the regular season. It's not great for anyone involved right now.
No, it's not. And I think it continues to look worse and worse. There were some comments Cam Neely made around that $64 million thing that I think we should touch on. But first, quick words from our friends over at Prize Picks. Prize Picks is America's #1 daily fantasy sports app with over 5 million active members. Prize Picks is the easiest and most exciting way to play daily fantasy sports. Unlike other apps, on Prize Picks, it's just you against the numbers. All you do is pick more or less on 2 to 6 player stat projections and watch the winnings roll in. Get in on the daily action with your friends and become part of the Prize Picks community today. Sign up today and get $50 instantly when you play $5. You don't even need to win to receive the $50 bonus. It's guaranteed. One Caleb Williams passing yard gets you 1 win on Prize Picks every week in September. That's right, only 1 yard gets you an automatic win every football weekend in September. 4 weeks of free W's. Don't miss this deal on Prize Picks because it's gone when September ends. Prize Picks invented the flex play, which means you can still cash out if your lineup isn't perfect. You can double your money, even if one of your picks doesn't hit. Prize Picks is the only real money daily fantasy platform with an injury insurance policy so that your lineup stay in play even if one of your players gets injured. If your player leaves in the first half and doesn't return, your picks are still live. Big questions going into the football season. Will Patrick Mahomes throw for more or less than 267.5 yards one week? Will Jalen Hurts throw for 240.5 passing yards another? Download the Prize Picks app today and use code CLNS and get $50 instantly when you play $5. That's code CLNS on Prize Picks to get $50 instantly when you play $5. You don't even need to win to receive the $50 bonus because it's guaranteed. Prize Picks, run your game. Now, back to the show. So I found this interesting from Cam Neely. Obviously, Cam Neely, former player, if you didn't know, if you weren't aware, Cam Neely used to play hockey. Made a comment right before the $64 million reasons one, and he said, I think overall Don's done a really good job of initial offers to players. One of the things we talked about when he got the job was being a former player. I'm not a big fan of low ball, high ball, figured out somewhere in the middle. It's like, okay, get the right comp group, put the right offer on the table. And I think Don's past has shown that he can get deals done. This one's just been a little trickier. And then he went on to say, if Swayman's trying to reset the market, he said, I do. Just what his ask is and what we believe his comp group is are two different things. Now, again, it's hard. Sometimes people in power like that lie, like how they do things. It occasionally happens. But in this case, if they're offering 8x8, they're sticking their neck out. Like 8 years is a gamble. $8 million is not what he's currently worth. He's worth less than that, right? At the current moment, as I explained earlier. But that's sticking your neck out for the guy. That's like, hey, you know what? Like, that's not a low ball. And so that is the definition of like, we're not doing low ball. We're not doing high ball. We feel that, this is a fair offer. You took a star arbitration last year. We decided to do 1 year instead of 2. Here's 8x8. This is, this looks good. I think that's another reason why they're pissed is that they've stuck their neck out. They've thrown him a great contract. And it goes to this, like, obviously his agent, Louis Gross, is kind of notorious for these sort of long, drawn out negotiations. Now, I don't know Louis Gross. So I don't know him personally. I've never talked to him, obviously, about this. What I find interesting is, Connor, I don't know what people think about agents. But you get agents usually around like 13, 14, 15 years old. Not if you're really good. Now, I don't know when Swayman and Louis Gross got together. And there are lots of great agents out there. And Louis Gross, by the way, has been very successful. So, like,
Yes.
I'm not saying he's a bad agent. He's, he clearly is not. But when you have an agent in your ear as a player, and this happens at every level, whether to leave prep school early for juniors, whether it's to commit to a certain college, whether it's, NHL draft related stuff, whatever it is, sometimes agents mess up. Sometimes they mess up. And to me, if it is all the way it is, the way we believe it right now, which is, Jeremy Swayman was offered 8 years by, 8 times 8 and said no, that's a mistake. And here, and the other thing is, if Swayman's AAV is under 8 million per, what a waste of time this all was. Like,
right.
If that number, like I was talking with Hags about this, like if that number is under 8 million per, whether it's a 4-year deal, an 8-year deal, a 1-year deal, whatever it is, what was this for? Like, unless Swayman comes out and says they didn't offer us 8x8 until the very end, like then obviously that's different. They didn't initially offer it, whatever. But if he said no to 8x8 and then, it ends up being like a 4-year, $7.5 million deal or whatever it ends up being, like, what was all this for? What, like, that's the other part of it. It's like, he doesn't look great right now. If that number's under 8, I don't know. I don't see it. I don't see it.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, that is like the risk you run with these contracts, right? And that's why this whole thing's unfortunate, right? Because the Bruins really like Jeremy Swayman. Jeremy Swayman likes playing in Boston. Like, this is a guy that is here year round. He's at the feast in the North End. He's out and about all of the ways, playing with Dalton and the Sheriffs, like at random shows. Guy like is everything you want in terms of a goalie that isn't. Yeah, he's everything you want out of a goalie in this market that embraces the fans. You look at like where we were like a few months ago in the middle of May, right? Where Bruins lose game 6 to Florida, and you've got Swayman chants the whole last couple of minutes of that game. He's emotional after the game, talking about how much the fans mean to him. And now because of all of this, and whether that's, I think there's blame on all sides, right? With how these contract negotiations have gone. Now you have a point where, again, like the sentiment is not completely turned. I'm not saying this is like an alarmist way of being like bridges are burned or like Bruins fans no longer like it, but it has shifted like the perception. And that's why this whole negotiation sucks, right? Because Swayman was viewed as this guy that is your franchise guy that you're excited to go to war with moving forward. And now, like, whether it's the narratives about like how these contract negotiations have gone, whether he's going to be worth whatever his new contract is going to be, like it's the same with like Rask, when he made that transition from promising young goalie that is part of the future to like, well, now he's making $7 million. Like, why is he not doing this? Like, maybe that just happens to every goalie in this market. But if you do see like the sentiment and some of the perception of Swayman like takes a hit off of this thing, which again, I'm not throwing stones at the guy. I'm not like trying to drag him for how these things have gone, but it is a casualty of what these contract talks are. And I think it further makes it worse with Neely, mentioning this thing as kind of the ultimatum, right, of throwing that actual money out there. Because now what seems to be the main sentiment from what has been kind of gathered so far today on Monday is like, what the hell is Swayman and his camp doing, right? And like, it's only going to get louder unless Swayman and his camp come out and say that wasn't the case or what have you. It's just, it hurts his overall perception right now. And maybe that's just the cost of doing business, but it's just unfortunate it gets to this point where if it was something and he settles for under 8 or it's 8x8, then as you said, what was all this worth? Like, what was this for? Because now even if he does sign, again, not saying that the bridges are burned or anything like that, but all of a sudden, if he has a bad game or two, I think Bruins fans who will go to war for Swayman a year ago, you can hear a few more. They're like, is he worth that contract? Like, damage is kind of done in that regard, which maybe that is just the heavy is the head that wears the crown in Boston in this market at that position. But it's unfortunate that we got to this point. And what was it all for if this contract isn't something that is leagues ahead of what we think this 8x8 contract is going to end up being?
At least in the public eye. Again,
right.
Like I think, you look at the situation, and to me, like I don't know what the negotiations were like. We don't know what they are. We're not in there with them, so no one knows what's going on except for the parties involved. But in the public eye, like Swayman's camp took the first shots. You had, them clearly talking to the Chicklets crew. You had, Swayman going on that podcast. They weren't even shots, but just sort of talking about intentions. And, obviously the Chicklets thing was, they lowballed him and then they won't return their calls for 3 weeks. Like, that's where I think this starts from. I think Swayman going on that podcast and talking about negotiations and things like that also really rubbed them the wrong way.
I mean, Neely literally responded to a comment that was made in that podcast. The resetting the goalie market was from that podcast.
Yes. So again, like, I think he's pissed them off. And I go back to, like, let's say they do sign a deal, which, again, both sides say they want to. How does that relationship reset itself? Like, I get the negotiations are not personal. Everyone tries to, like, show that and negotiate. Oh, it wasn't personal. This is personal. We haven't heard from Swayman's camp for a little while here. Unless, I know Ryan Whitney said some more things. And by the way, I'm not, like, judging Ryan Whitney for that stuff. Like, he's getting told what he's getting told. Like, I trust Ryan Whitney on that stuff. But, you look at what Neely has said, the president of the Bruins, what Don Sweeney has consistently said, GM of the Bruins, what Jim Montgomery, his head coach, who said, oh, it's no big deal, in that preseason press conference. And then today is like, yeah, Korpisalo's starting game 1. We're riding with him, this and that. Again, I go back to, like, he didn't have to say that today. To me, it's like, how does that reset itself? And by the way, if they sign like a bridge deal, like 3 or 4 years, I can't imagine them signing a long-term deal 3 or 4 years from now unless Swayman has completely new representation. I can't. Like, to think that you're going to go back and however the next 3 or 4 years go, if that's the contract that you sign, how are you going to come to terms on an 8-year deal 3 or 4 years from now? I know that's a big ask. We don't know what the cap's going to look like or anything, but I don't know how that relationship comes back to be. And, you mentioned it with the fans. And again, Tuukka Rask survived here with, hatred from a certain part of the fan base. It is possible to do. And also, fans have short memories. Like, I also think, like, if Swayman comes in and is nasty, like, no one will care about this. But there is that other end of it where it's like they start the season, 5-8, and, they're out of the playoffs and things look grim. Or you have the other end of it where, like, they're nasty and it's like, all right, well, what is this dude doing? Like, who cares about this dude? Saying what some fans might think. I don't think that's the right way to think. But I don't know. I think it's a fascinating look at sort of how they have kind of been mudslinging at each other. And the Bruins, aren't just going to let that camp go to town on them. They're not just going to let them, talk and say what they've been saying without some sort of response. We'll dive deeper into this. Linus Ullmark trade coming back up. Which is always fun. And we'll get into that in a sec. But first, quick word from our friends over at Game Time. Fall is beginning, which means football is back. Nothing beats a college football atmosphere. And with both college and NFL games, who doesn't love a good tailgate? Get to the game with Game Time. Game Time has a new feature called Game Time Picks that makes getting tickets to see your favorite teams play live even easier. Game Time Picks filters out the fluff to show you only incredible deals on great seats so you don't have to waste time searching through thousands of tickets. This fall, my friends and I are going to the Patriots-Titans game in Tennessee. And how will we get tickets for the game? Game Time, of course. The super deal has been amazing to us in the past, and there's no doubt it will be great to us again. I just love the curated deals, which make it easier to find the best price on great seats. Some other features I love are the lowest price guarantee, or Game Time will credit you 110% of the difference. Game Time Picks curation makes it easier to save more on sports, concerts, comedy, and theater. All-in pricing. Toggling this feature shows the total upfront with no surprise fees at checkout. So, download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code CLNS for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code CLNS for $20 off. Download Game Time today. Last minute tickets, lowest price, guaranteed. Now, back to the show. So one decision that's getting questioned quite a bit is this Linus Ullmark trade that happened back in June, which, by the way, Korpisalo now starting game 1, actually ended up helping them, at least for a short term. Sweeney's still adamant that was not a mistake. He doesn't regret it. That he felt they did the right thing at the time. What do you think?
I mean, you also have to factor in, right, that the Bruins were kind of pressed for time in terms of, I think, July 1st, it would have reset Ullmark's trade protection. So he could have changed who he could have put, trade protections on. So again, if he's hearing that Ottawa's interested and they weren't on his list or what have you, he could have easily changed them on July 1st and made things a lot more difficult. So the Bruins were operating with limited time in that regard. They weren't just, doing like, they got the one call from Ottawa. I'm like, oh, let's do it now. And not think about like the potential domino effect of that, right? Like, I do think that factored heavily in terms they needed to get a deal done by July 1st, which also, if you're the Bruins and you think you have a lot of cap space, which you still do, you still have like over $8.5 million right now to work with. I don't think they were expecting this contract negotiating to drag out to the extent where it's like, all right, we need to sign Swayman right now, kind of deal with this and then figure out down the line how much cap space we have left. I think for them, it's like, all right, we move Ullmark now before July 1st because we have a deal that gives us a first round pick and what have you. And then it's like, all right, get to July 1st, free agency, spend the money on the guys we want to get, allocate 8.5, or so left and handle Swayman because he can't be asking for more than that, right? And you're in this spot. So I think there's a lot of circumstances and a lot of things that probably pushed them to this point. But I don't think it was, when you look at just the fact that they had to make that deal before July 1st. And I think it was probably wise, and we look back at it now, hindsight, what have you, them having all that cap space and going out and getting guys to add to this group and spending the money there while leaving money left behind for Swayman. I still think that's the right move, as opposed to all of a sudden maybe get into this dragged out conflict a month or so earlier, kind of being in no man's land and wondering, like, are we going to have enough money to sign Lindholm and Zadorov? Like, I'd rather you do that, or however they handle it, than you are now. I say that now as they don't have Jeremy Swayman in net for game one, but I think that's kind of what their plan was. And I'm not going to, I think, begrudge them for that approach in terms of getting the guys you identified on the open market, bolster your current group, while also, again, it's not like they only had $5 million left for Swayman or something like that, or 6.5. Like, oh, there's 6.5. There you go. Like, 8.5 should be enough to work with to sign a guy when you look at the reps and all the comparables, all those kinds of things to get to this point.
I think it's clear they thought that they were going to sign him, not easily, but relatively, not this hard, wasn't going to be this difficult.
The runway was there, right? Like,
yes,
that's the important.
Cap space, time, all that stuff. And I think hindsight's 2020. Now you go back to July, or I think it was end of June when they made that trade. If they had traded Jeremy Swayman then, there would be riots, and we would kill them for it.
The NHL would also kill the Bruins because that was an hour before Game 7 between Florida and the Oilers.
I forgot about that. That was Game 7 of the Cup. Yeah, that too. Where but again, if they got a lot for Swayman, and I imagine that someone out there probably would have given quite a haul for Jeremy Swayman, which I think we'll be talking about in a couple minutes. In DEFCON 4. But again, I've said it a number of times, this is the guy you developed. You drafted him. You brought him in. He's shown every indication that he's going to be a number one guy, a good number one goalie in the current and long distant future. So to me, I don't begrudge them for that. I think they made the right call. Swayman gives them the best chance. He's been more proven in the playoffs, which is the Bruins' kind of problem over the last bunch of years, is can you find someone that is going to be reliable for you in the postseason? So I don't get on them for that. I get why people do. And you're right about the July 1 thing as well. You have to factor that in too. And if they started the year with both goalies, Ullmark and Swayman again,
right,
it'd be
exactly.
what are you guys doing? But this leads into this. Obviously, I've seen a lot of people advocating, just trade Jeremy Swayman, screw him, you don't need him, blah, blah, blah. I still disagree with that. I still am nowhere near trading him. I will say, though, if you are going to trade Jeremy Swayman, if that does end up being the case, if you get to November, if you get to Thanksgiving and, you have to just do a 1-year deal to get him to play and then deal him, trade him to a horrible team with a very high chance at getting the number 1 overall pick so you can hopefully draft James Higgins. That would be the
BC guy.
That's the trade. I'm sorry. That would be the trade to me. That's what I would go for. If you're going to trade Swayman, because I'm so against this, by the way. Like I'm not saying trade Jeremy Swayman, but if you are, get the number 1 pick. Get the number 1 pick if you're going to do that. But again, I don't know how much leverage they're going to have at the time of doing this.
Yeah,
so that's the other part.
That's the whole issue, right? If this was something that you were realistically expecting, one, you probably should have. If you thought this was going to get to this point, then maybe they move Swayman in the offseason instead of Ullmark, right? Like that's the one thing. And again, hindsight 2020, like all those things. But
I'm saying if it's like becomes an emergency, becomes you have to like it's gotten so bad. I don't think the thing is
now. Yeah, now when you get to this point of the offseason, though, like maybe it is something where you sign him to a 1-year deal and kick the can down the road moving forward. But like you look at, like, as you said, like trade him to a bad team, try to get a number 1 pick. Like you saw that with like Askarov with San Jose, right? Which again, San Jose has their guy now, but that is kind of, I imagine, what you mapped out, right? Like a young team that is probably going to suck for a year or two, but you get a young number 1 goalie for the future. Like that one would make a lot of sense. But Askarov is now in San Jose. You don't have that. You don't have, there's only so many teams right now that could take whatever Swayman's contract is going to be, right? Like, is
could
it
be Columbus?
9.5? Yeah, like it could be something like that. But there's only so many suitors right now, especially if it's an emergency and you have to trade them, that you're not going to get probably full value. If we knew in June that it was going to get to this point and the Bruins were realistically going to field offers for, we'd be talking about Draisaitl and all these other guys, right? Like, in terms, I'm not saying that's a 1-for-1 deal, of course, but if you have a 25-year-old goalie who's coming off of, a .933 save percentage, had the best goals saved above expected of anyone, right? Or, yeah, I think he was number 1 or number 2, and he only played 2 rounds. The guy with that kind of value and how coveted good goalies are in the league would have gotten something pretty damn good for the guy, whether it's another goalie, whether it's multiple picks, whether it's a legit top line, top 6 player, what have you. The options open up quite a bit for you if you actually were going to weigh that option just a few months ago. So now your options are kind of limited. Maybe it is just draft picks you get, but again, if we get to the point, Evan, where we are talking about trading, where the Bruins are talking about trading Swayman, then shame on everyone involved that it's gotten to this point. Like that.
Oh, completely.
It is complete failure from all parties to have a 25-year-old goalie who's looks the part of a future number 1 goalie hit that point. It'd be rough.
Oh, terrible. But I'm just saying, like, if that is the route that you have to take, or you feel the need to do that, again, I look at it and it's different positions, it's different times, all that. It's like when they traded Kessel to Toronto, like it's around that same kind of age, drafted, developed, high-end player. Like you better be getting an unprotected first-round pick back. And if you deal him to a bad team, which again, like I don't, Columbus could have, potentially be a spot, or Anaheim has Gibson. I know that Utah.
San Jose would have made a ton of sense.
Yes. San Jose would have made it
because they already have a really good young core, but they're not quite ready yet. But you could see why they'd want a guy like Swayman sooner rather than later, because that's a team that 2 years from now could be really damn good, even if this year is tough sledding, maybe.
And I think you also have the other end of it where like Higgins seems like the prospective number 1 pick in this draft. So if San Jose were to get the number 1 pick, they'd have Higgins, Smith, and Celebrini. Those are all number 1 centers or projected number 1 centers in the NHL. You cannot have one of those 3 guys be on your third line. Right. So again, you'd essentially be trading potentially James Higgins for Jeremy Swayman. And again, for those who don't know, James Higgins is, barring something crazy, is going to be the number 1 pick next June.
Would you trade if the Bruins get Swayman on a 1-year deal and they intend to trade him next year? Would you trade Jeremy Swayman for Jimmy Higgins?
Straight up?
Yes. It's like San Jose has a number 1 pick and they draft him and they swap him for Swayman.
Yeah.
You would do
On
that?
a 1 year, Swayman on a 1 year deal?
Yeah. With the
And
expectation
things
that
have gotten bad, and things have
yeah,
gotten that bad.
yes,
Yeah, I would.
yeah,
I would. Maybe that's naive of me. Maybe that's the New England Hockey Journal in me. Maybe that's but I'm serious. Like that kid is that's your future number one center. That is your guy. Like that is everyone questions Lindholm being a number one center, Patra being a top 6 center, Letourneau, that whole situation. Hagens is a number one center in the NHL. Whether that's in 2 years, 3 years, like he is legit. And I mean, I think that's Jack Hughes. So to me, yes. Yeah, absolutely. I would. But again, if they lock Swayman up, it's not going to matter. But as you said, on a 1 year deal where things have soured and you're back at the negotiating table in the summer, and somehow San Jose comes along and says, we will take Swayman off your hands, and here's James Hagens. Yeah. Yeah. Oh my God. Yeah.
yeah. I feel like the San Jose would get pretty bad grades for that, even if Swayman is legit. But again, opens up options if you get to that point.
But for what I just said to you, like Celebrini, you have
Yeah.
Celebrini, you have Will Smith, you have those guys. You don't. I mean, Askarov, we'll see, is a goalie prospect still at this point,
right?
Like Swayman's a proven guy, and again, like the team's far off from contending. But again, you get Swayman, and then you have Smith and Celebrini, and they don't have much on defense, so that'd be another thing of like good luck playing behind those guys. But again, like young guy can build with that core. I could see it. Like I don't know if San Jose would ever do that, because again, James Hagens is a once in a long time prospect. But yeah, I would do it. I would, and maybe that comes back to bite me. Maybe that's old takes exposed. Like I don't know, but Hagens is freaking good.
Swayman's gonna sign 8x8 tomorrow. It's gonna be very funny. But hey, at this point, like who the hell knows what? I have no idea what to expect from this. I guarantee if you listen to our podcast probably from July, we did not expect to be talking about Swayman for James Hagens like a week before the start of the regular season. We gotta make sure
that stays the hell away from like Twitter. Like, no, that we never said Hagens for Swayman. I mean, I stand by it. Like, again, goes into like when they would do like the Brady Tkachuk for David Pastrnak stuff, which again is wild. But like, I mean, again, like I will reiterate, a generational franchise number one center for a probably top 10 goalie in the NHL. I would rather have Hagens. I'm sorry. Yeah. I'm sorry. Like, I would. And they need it. The Bruins need it. Like, again, we'll see what they do in net. Lord knows. But again, I both sides are adamant they want to do a long-term deal. And sure, but someone's got to blink. That's the biggest thing. Someone's got to blink first. And to me, if the Bruins have offered 8x8, how much higher are they going? Like, are they going to wake up and be like, actually, you're worth 8 times 8.5. Like, no, they've stuck their neck out. They have put their chips to the middle of the table in terms of what they're going to offer.
Bruins offer 8 by 8.1 tomorrow. Bruins 8.05.
Swayman's like, win, got him.
Yes,
we got him. And by the way, like, we can't say it enough. We are pro players getting the bag. We are. I can't say that enough. Like. This is not, we're not like pro-establishment. We're not like, yes, the billionaires are, yes, they're making them work for as little as possible. Woo! Like, that's not us. I cannot say that enough. It's not us. But this, again, like, you get
this sucks, Evan. It's not great. No one benefits from this right now.
No, it doesn't. No one benefits from this. And I don't
maybe
care
James Hagens.
Yeah, James Hagens is gonna get to stay in Boston. He'll just get to go from BC to. I hope this becomes a rumor. Like
no, Evan, I really hope it doesn't actually. So
because some people cannot decipher the difference between like just us talking or opinions and like actual hard news. So somewhere someone is like texting in their like friend group chat, being like, yo, like Bruins are about to trade Jeremy Swayman for James Hagens. Like Jeremy Swayman's going to go play for BC this year. James Hagens is going to come out and play for the Bruins.
He traded for James Hagens, who's not even in the end. Yeah, he's not even drafted yet. But it's going to be like when the Celtics had like Larry Bird's rights when he was still like in college, or like they had like that weird thing where they drafted him like a year ahead of time.
Hagen's gonna reach out to me and be like, "What are you talking about? Like, what
Exactly.
are you doing? Shut the fuck up."
Yes.
But I mean, again, like that. But that's that's the bar I have. If you're trading Jeremy Swayman, if you're doing that, and you can thank Hags for putting this into people's heads of like, him talking about this like 3 weeks ago. You have to get that kind of player back. It cannot be, an assortment of the 21st overall pick and, a middle six forward and like a top defenseman prospect or something.
Right.
Like, it can't be that. You need someone impactful. And by God, James Higgins is going to be impactful. I would put my savings on it. So, yeah, there you go.
How the hell did we get here, Evan?
I don't know. This is why we usually put the cap on at like 30 minutes.
Yeah.
It's just after like 11 p.m. You don't get into crazy stuff, but this is sort of that. I don't think there's anything left to talk about Swayman in this. Like, I think we've said all.
I'm sure we'll have something to talk about in a couple of days as well. Don't worry.
We will.
Those bullets.
We will. But for today, I think we're gonna leave it at this. Yeah, so wild freaking day. Again, with our luck, they will sign a contract tomorrow.
Probably like as soon as we're done recording this.
They'll be out. It's all just
the James Higgins thing's gonna look really shitty if they sign like in like 30 minutes.
No, it can't. This was a great idea.
Yes.
We'll have to reshoot the entire thing. I love when people are like, "Oh, you should post the podcast you're going to post anyway, like around the trade deadline." It's like, why?
Oh God, no, absolutely not. No.
Terrible.
Yeah, no thanks.
Terrible. Anyways, Connor, what can the people look forward to from you at the Boston Globe and Boston.com?
Yeah, we'll have it covered every step of the way from training camp, preseason, all the way till hopefully June in the Stanley Cup playoffs and beyond. You can find all my stuff over at Boston.com and the Boston Globe. And if you want to follow me on Twitter, you can at Conor Ryan _93.
Go do all that. I can't wait for the column of why the Bruins should trade Jeremy Swayman for James Higgins. I can't wait. It's going to be terrific. It'll be so great. And you have to admit that he's good, even though he plays for BC. So that's great. That's great.
What a time. What a time, Evan.
Lucky you. Anyway, that's been Bruins Beat. We'll hit you with more stuff throughout the week, as we always do. That is Conor Ryan. I'm Evan Marinofsky. Bruins Beat listeners, have a great rest of your week.